I think it is safe to say that the world of fanfiction and AUs are just as trope-heavy as the world of original media. It is extremely common for fanfiction to feature reoccurring scenarios and situations, much like original pieces of fiction. I'm sure we've all heard of the only one bed trope, for example. And oftentimes, AUs are in some way inspired by another piece of original media, such as fantasy AUs being inspired by Dungeons and Dragons. But there are certain tropes in AUs that have really taken off in fandom culture. In my video about the world of AUs, I mentioned a category of AU known as the modern AU. Essentially, AUs that feature the characters in situations that are more relatable to everyday life, often removing the fantastical elements and placing the characters in recognizable, relatable, real-life situations. These are AUs meant to represent life that is more similar to our own lives, focusing on lower stakes interpersonal conflict. This category of AUs has a wide variety of subcategories, such as high school AUs, college AUs, band AUs, domestic AUs, flower shop and tattoo artist AUs, and of course the subject of today's video, coffee shop AUs. On the surface, a coffee shop AU is a very easy concept to explain. It is an alternate universe where one or more characters work at a coffee shop. Oftentimes, this AU is combined with a ship featuring one character as an employee and the other character as a customer. Sometimes these AUs are also combined with college AUs, but that's not exactly a necessary factor. Usually these AUs are significantly less angsty than whatever their original source material is, and in most cases, that would be the end of the discussion. But coffee shop AUs are extremely fascinating to me. They have been a staple of fandom culture and history for a very long time now. Coffee shop AUs are easily one of the most common AU types, and to many people, these AUs are the symbol of wholesome, fluffy, alternate timelines where the characters get a well-deserved break. And this leads to the question, why? Why do people love coffee shop AUs so much? Why have coffee shop AUs served as a cornerstone of fanfiction for so long? Why do people find them so compelling? And what can they tell us about the nature of fanfiction as a whole? Let's begin. To start, where exactly did this idea originate from? What was the first ever coffee shop AU fanfiction? Well, according to a sci-fi article by Christina Menente, the origins of the trope specifically in fanfiction can be traced back to a fic published in 2001 by user NSYNCGirl, aka JM Snyder. The fic in question being titled Café de Amor, I don't know if that's accurate, I don't know French, I'm sorry, I think it's French, ignore me. And being a piece of NSYNC RPF, or real person fanfiction. Now, we don't quite know for sure if this really was the first ever coffee shop AU fic, because knowing fandom, there's probably one involving Star Trek characters from a 70s zine somewhere, but this fic here is the earliest recorded one. But why did this idea connect with so many readers? Why did this simple fanfiction spawn such a common and widely used trope? Well, Snyder herself commented on why she thinks this format was appealing at the time. Quote, "When I first graduated from college, I worked for a few months as a barista at a coffee shop, so the story is heavily inspired by my experiences there," Snyder explains. As to what made Café de Amor popular, she believes people just liked seeing the bandmates doing something other than being in a world-famous boy band. And indeed, that is one of the core features of alternate universe AU fanfictions. That question of what if and the implication that someone's favorite celebrity or character could be right around the corner. So let's use this quote from the article as our starting grounds. Removing this mentality from the context of RPF, this idea could also be applied to fantasy and action-adventure stories, specifically the what-if aspect. There is something inherently kind of interesting about the idea of placing characters used to adventure and drama in such a calm and chill environment. The inherent tonal whiplash from the source material versus the fanfiction is quite humorous to a lot of fans. Not only that, but it is also a lot of fun to imagine how these alternate interpretations would play out. Sometimes it can be enjoyable to see a character in a scenario or setting that doesn't really fit their design. For example, taking a character who is of nobility and all high and mighty and forcing them to work a minimum wage job. For many fans, this is just a really funny example of tonal dissonance. Fans also like to imagine their favorite characters in scenarios that they find relatable. It's why so many people project onto characters they love. We often have a desire to relate to character we find comforting. So in the case where we have a desire to connect to a character on a more personal level, we may write the character in a way or scenario that is more, for lack of a better word, self-indulgent. So in a lot of modern AUs, we draw from our own real-life experiences and project them onto our favorite characters. Largely we do this because it is fun to imagine a character we relate to and feel connected to being more like us. And thus, placing your beloved characters in the coffee shop setting is a very common example of that. Coffee shop AUs also serve as examples of one of the most common motivations behind writing a fanfiction: giving the characters a break. Many fanfictions exist to let the characters rest from their traumatic and life-changing adventures. These fanfictions often have less dramatic stakes, more focused on interpersonal, calmer conflict compared to big, world-ending struggles, and the coffee shop has often been used as the default setting for these kinds of AUs. Coffee shops in fandom are often used to symbolize a world much like our own, a much simpler, less terrifying world. A world where the biggest worry these characters have is average customer service scuffles. Pretty much every fandom I've been in where the characters experience some kind of serious fate of the world level struggle, the discussions will be full of people wishing that these characters could just take a break, which is honestly understandable. Once you're deeply attached to a character, it can really hurt to see them in constant turmoil. Or you might want to make the pain worse by writing increasingly sad angst like me, although sometimes these two types of people aren't mutually exclusive. Regardless, it is extremely common for fans to have a desire for more lighthearted, less stressful conflict. And while you can argue that is the main appeal of every single variant of a modern AU, the coffee shop is the main one that people immediately point to as an example. Why exactly is that the case? Well, to some degree, the coffee shop AU and the coffee shop itself is a very romanticized idea that many people are drawn to. I mean that in multiple ways. One aspect of coffee shop AUs I find interesting is the fact that the shop itself is often a part of this romanticized fantasy. The shop is usually an in-universe, small, independent shop as opposed to a Starbucks or something. Oftentimes, the coffee shop is in some way a reference to the source material, but in many cases it is just a random independent shop. This may seem inconsequential, but this is a part of the fantasy of coffee shop AUs. You see, for a lot of people, a place can be just as comforting as a piece of media or a character, and a quiet, peaceful coffee shop where you can just enjoy a nice warm drink and read a book is a very pleasant idea, especially if the coffee shop in question is a small shop rather than a large chain. It makes the place feel more special, more personal. It makes the place feel like it stands out. And it is quite common for this feeling to appear in coffee shop AUs. And I can't deny I understand the appeal of this aspect of the fantasy and the feeling it creates. I completely understand why people feel this way about certain locations in their life. It immediately draws me back to memories of going to Barnes & Noble's with my aunt and getting a cookie from the cafe and starting to read the new books I got that day. I know it's not the same, but locations like this create an oddly nostalgic feeling, and I can understand why it makes so many people feel comforted. But even outside of the setting, the idea itself is very romanticized, especially in the shipping scenario. And speaking of the shipping scenario, let's discuss that. As I mentioned earlier, coffee shop AUs are often tied to a ship, specifically with the scenario of an employee ex-customer. And the way in which these coffee shop employee ex-customer scenarios play out is very idealized. I think it is safe to say that in real life, most people working as a barista probably have better things to do than daydream about a random frequent customer if they even remember the frequent customer at all. And yet, coffee shop AUs are often used for shipping purposes. And while shipping is 9 times out of 10 a factor of any piece of fanfiction, coffee shop AUs tend to be more widely mocked compared to other ship AU scenarios. And that is largely because the concept and how unbelievable it is. As sweet of an idea as it is, a romance in a coffee shop AU is always going to be unrealistic. But also, most romance in media is somewhat unrealistic. The difference really boils down to whether or not the media is fanfiction. Because for multiple reasons, fanfiction is seen as lesser writing compared to other types of schlocky romance. Now, I'm not saying every person who has ever criticized the unrealistic nature of fanfiction thinks less of fanfiction, but it is accurate to say that fanfiction has different expectations that they need to live up to. And that is because the average perception of fanfiction's overall quality is not that good. It's safe to say that most people who don't read fanfiction have a specific idea of fanfiction in their head. That idea being that a majority of fanfiction falls into the laughably bad category on the same level as the legend My Immortal. Because people often view fanfiction as being written just by young children, the average perception from non-readers tends to be pretty negative and judgmental. Fanfiction is often characterized as being of worse quality on average compared to original media, and arguably a lot of the time these people are actively searching for bad fanfiction to prove their point, but let's not get into that now. This is despite the fact that realistically fanfiction is a medium of pure passion. You can't exactly write fanfiction just for profit. Fanfiction is a type of writing that spawns from a person's genuine and extreme love of an existing piece of media. It exists because of how much the writer loves the characters in question. The only thing a fanfiction writer gains is the knowledge that other passionate fans also liked their work. It is purely a labor of love, and oftentimes that is a motivator for a writer to make the fanfiction as good as it can possibly be. And besides, young writers need to start somewhere. Even if the quality is not as professional as a published book, fanfiction is still admirable and worthy of praise. I am of the belief that art doesn't need to be perfect to be appreciated, and that includes fanfiction. And of course, a large amount of fanfiction is in some way tied to romance. For whatever reason, a lot of writers enjoy writing romantic arcs, and I can't deny I am included in this. When you really think about it, it's not super uncommon to fantasize about meet-cutes and rom-com style romance. I think it is safe to say that in our modern media landscape, romance is an expected and assumed element of storytelling. It is genuinely hard for me to think of a piece of media that has no romance at all, and I think it's safe to say that this has affected the way many people view romance in our current culture. There is a reason shipping is inescapable in any and all fandoms, no matter what. People have and arguably always will be drawn to romance stories. This is something I want to delve into more in a separate video, but it is important to acknowledge that many young people's views on romance are in some way shaped by the shows and movies and books they engage with, and to some extent that now includes fanfiction. Believe me, I mock repetitive rom-coms just as much as the average person, but even I can admit to being a sucker for romance stories. And in many romantic stories, the setup is just as important as the actual development of the relationship, so it makes sense that young people are drawn to a simple meet-cute scenario that feels possible, at least to them. It can be fun to imagine these types of scenarios and dream that they may one day become reality. The sad truth is, none of us are ever going to live the lives of our favorite characters. I mean, depending on your favorite characters, that might be a good thing, but I think it is safe to say that many of us want something more out of our lives. We dream about achieving our goals and living lives that resemble a piece of fiction because real life usually never works out the way we assume. And love is one of those things we can never really predict or prepare for. Real life is unpredictable. Real life doesn't have a straightforward arc that we can follow. Real life doesn't have a definitive end to our character developments. And yet, a life that resembles a fictional story is something that many people want and dream of, which is part of why we are drawn to romance stories in media. We dream of being able to meet our perfect match in a memorable, life-changing way and living happily ever after. Romance is one of the most popular genres of media for a reason. No matter how much we make fun of romance movies, they appeal to a very common fascination with romance. So it makes sense to me that people idealize media tropes like the coffee shop. The coffee shop in fandom is a symbol of this phenomenon. But maybe the issue people have with these AUs isn't really the concept itself, and more so how common it is. Maybe people judge these AUs differently because they are so widespread amongst any and all fandoms. No matter the genre or tone, there is probably going to be a coffee shop AU. However, when you really think about it, with how many fandoms have coffee shop AUs, what else can really be done with the concept? I mean, at this point, coffee shop AUs are the de facto AU, whether as an honest example or as mockery. Many people find the concept overdone or cliche, and yeah, realistically with how famous this AU type is, it makes sense that people would eventually get tired of it, but I do think in the context of fanfiction, these stories have an advantage that most original rom-com stories don't. Remember, the characters in these fanfiction are pre-existing characters. They already have arcs, themes, flaws, and characteristics that fans can draw from and work with. When a fan writes a fan fiction about their favorite characters, it's often because they want to explore an element of the characters that the canon text doesn't explore, or at the very least doesn't explore in a way that the fans like. As such, the fans can utilize the unique aspects of the characters they're writing. They don't have to completely craft a new, original character in a compelling arc. They can just adapt an existing character arc to fit with the setting. Remember, if you want people to enjoy a romance arc, they have to at least enjoy the characters first. And, well, that's already dealt with in fanfiction. And because of this, despite the common setting, no two coffee shop AUs are really going to be the same. And that is largely because of the vast array of possible characters you can throw into the setting. Fans can also utilize the worlds of the source material they are working with. While the first major piece of coffee shop fanfiction was a real person fanfiction, when you expand this concept into the vast landscape of original fiction, fans can work the rules of the world they're drawing from into a modern context. And this applies to all modern AUs, not just coffee shops, but basically this allows for each fandom to have a unique interpretation of the concept. An action-adventure story is going to have a vastly different type of coffee shop AU compared to a story that already takes place in a world resembling ours. And you would be surprised as to how creative fans can get when it comes to AUs. But that is also an element of these AUs that I find deeply fascinating. Despite how simple the concept is, the fact it has remained an essential element of fandom culture and history for so long proves that the idea has longevity. Plus, when you think about it, formulas and cliches can be comforting to people. Remember, cliches are not inherently bad. It's all about the execution, and cliches should be analyzed on a case-by-case basis. And I think it's safe to say that many people have common characteristics that are consistent amongst the media they like. For example, let's look at myself and my own favorite media. I like media that features magic. I like media with vampires. I like media with Greek mythology references. I like media with a lot of angst. I like media that puts the characters through the ringer, but still allows them to succeed in the end no matter what. And I like media that features some kind of pathetic loser man that my brain can hyperfixate on. We've all got our niches. And while cliches and formulas ultimately depend on the specific execution, there is a reason as to why they stick around. Someone out there somewhere is going to enjoy it, so I could definitely believe that there is someone out there who loves coffee shop AUs no matter how many they read. The fact that someone out there will enjoy it no matter what means it is worthy of being written, at least to me. And I can imagine it would also be an interesting writing challenge to come up with a unique way to interpret the idea. It probably would be fun to take various coffee shop AUs from different fandoms and compare and contrast them. Try to figure out the common themes and analyze how the setting aids the character development. Honestly, that could be a fun video for multiple AUs. Maybe I'll do that someday. But anyway, I think it is important to remember that these AUs exist as fuel for comfort and joy first and foremost. They exist for escapism, to fantasize about a fun sitcom life. And the coffee shop being a location related to fun sitcom level comfort is actually not just a fanfiction thing. I think it is important to keep in mind that a lot of fanfiction is in some way inspired by the media and tropes the writers engage with, and the coffee shop AUs that appear in fanfiction are an example of this too. Something that, of all people, my mom pointed out to me is that the coffee shop in Friends' central perk could be connected to this idea. Now, I should clarify, I have never seen Friends, so I can't speak much on the actual plots or the conflicts in the show, but I do know the coffee shop is an essential location of the show and a frequently reoccurring element of the show's legacy and identity. It is the location in Friends. Honestly, the coffee shop is the only thing I really know about the show, so the idea obviously has a reach outside of fanfiction. And why exactly is that the case? Well, it's familiar. A lot of people like coffee, and in the real world, coffee shop AUs are everywhere, so it makes sense that they could be a source of comfort for people. I mean, I just discussed the fact that formulas and cliches can be comforting to people. Familiarity is often something that people are drawn to for one reason or another, whether in media or in real life. We enjoy things that are recognizable to us, specifically because they're things we are used to. We know it comforts us already, therefore we are drawn to it, because we know it makes us happy already. I also think it is common for people to have special comfort locations in their social circles. I know I certainly do. That being the Japanese barbecue place at the mall that my friends and I view as our special restaurant. It's a place we always come back to whenever we meet up. It's a location that is important to us despite it just being a random restaurant in a mall. I'm sure many of you have similar places, restaurants, shops, libraries, etc. for many people, their local independent coffee shop fits under this category. And of course, one of the most common pieces of advice young writers will often hear is write what you know. And while this is advice that is often misused, I think there is some truth to its effectiveness. So it makes sense that people will apply these familiar emotions to their fanfiction writing. Although, I think it is safe to say that nowadays a lot of the people writing these fics are too young to even work at coffee shops, which actually brings up a worthwhile talking point. I think an interesting development with coffee shop AUs is the fact that as the entry point for fanfiction writing has become younger and younger, a lot of people have begun to write these fics just because the trope is so popular and not because they know anything about coffee shops. I think a lot of young people are basing their coffee shop AUs off of other coffee shop AUs rather than any real experience. When J.M. Snyder wrote the first popular coffee shop AU, she based the plot off of her own life. But at that time, coffee shop AUs were not so widely associated with fanon, and now because it is such a widely beloved fanon concept, it has just kind of stuck around throughout the years and evolution of fanon. Thus, a lot of the people have just kept the trend going, even if they've never worked in a coffee shop or have any understanding of how they work. And yet, this fact has done little to deter people from dreaming of coffee shop romance, wishing they could experience it, or in this case, just writing about it. And I really am not too surprised by this. Fanfiction does not care about realism. Fanfiction is just for fun escapism. So what if a coffee shop romance is deeply unrealistic? Even if it is not based on any kind of realism, it is still a story that is worth telling. It is a story worth experiencing. It's cheesy, but it's sweet. And really, that's what fanfiction is all about. Fanfiction is just meant to be fun and passionate. Even if it is not a masterpiece of writing or a life-changing piece of art, fanfiction is still something special, and to me, a special piece of writing is just as important as a good piece of writing. To some degree, I think the coffee shop AU will always be an important factor of fanon culture. It has been a staple for such a long time, I don't see that changing anytime soon. Coffee shop AUs are a cornerstone of fanon culture, and that will likely be the case a decade from now. And despite how cheesy and popular these stories are, I still have an appreciation for them. Even though I have only ever really read through one coffee shop AU fic, I still think the concept deserves appreciation. It is an important part of fanon culture, and an idea that has continued to inspire fanfiction writers for years to come. Therefore, I think coffee shop AUs are worthy of praise despite their unrealistic nature. Fiction, and especially fanfiction, is an escape. A distraction from real life, a source of comfort that helps us ignore our mundane, average lives. In the case of modern AUs, these are distractions that let us fantasize about a more exciting life that actually feels possible. We may never experience the wonders of magic fantasy worlds, but we do have the possibility of experiencing cute, fluffy, uplifting romance in our lives. And for many people, even if it is unrealistic, it is nice to imagine and nice to write. And in that case, the concept is comforting. Whether because it is a nice change of pace compared to canon, or because it provides a fun fantasy for the reader, coffee shop AUs are something that appeal to a simple desire, that being the desire for something cute and sweet. Sometimes people don't want a massively intense masterpiece, sometimes you just want to write or read something more wholesome and lighthearted, and coffee shop AUs appeal to that desire. But while coffee shop AUs may have more substance than what appears on the surface, I would find them fascinating regardless. You could argue that they appeal to the intense human desire for comfort and familiarity, or they could just be fun and cheesy. Either way, they're certainly fun to analyze.